Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Yusuf Aram. With Donald Trump back in the White House, attention is turning to who will make up his cabinet. Former US Senator Marco Rubio has already been confirmed as Secretary of State, becoming the first official to secure Senate approval. However, crucial roles like Secretary of Defense, Director of National Intelligence, and other cabinet posts remain in limbo, awaiting confirmation. Rubio's hawkish foreign policy positions have been well documented, especially towards adversaries like China and Iran. He recently opposed efforts to establish a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas and has openly supported arming the YPG, a terror group responsible for cross-border attacks against Türkiye. Trump's national security advisor, Mike Waltz, shares similar pro-YPG sentiments, having sponsored legislation in Congress to sanction Türkiye. Adding to the controversy is Peter Hegseth, Trump's pick for Secretary of Defense. The former Army veteran and TV host faced intense scrutiny during his Senate hearings over his sexual assault allegations and his anti-Muslim rhetoric. Could these appointments create friction with Ankara and other Middle Eastern countries? For more, joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Mike Doran. He's a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. From Bethesda, Maryland, David Des Roches, associate professor at the National Defense University, and from Istanbul, Helin Ertem. She's an associate professor at Istanbul Medeniyet University. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining me. So, many cabinet members awaiting Senate confirmation. Marco Rubio already confirmed as Secretary of State. But while these confirmations are going on in Washington, throughout the Middle East, there's this own public opinion confirmation with everyone looking into what every single cabinet member said in the past about their country, tweeted about their country. Now, of course, the zeitgeist when those tweets happened, very, very different. The responsibilities and mandates, very, very different. I specifically want to concentrate on four positions today. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, I want to concentrate on him. Peter Hegseth, Secretary of Defense. Tulsi Gabbard, Director of National Intelligence, and also Mike Waltz, National Security Advisor. Now, Mike Doran, your thoughts on these previous statements that they made, are they still valid as the thinking for their foreign policy, or is it a whole new ballgame once you become part of the bureaucracy in the Trump administration?
Thanks for having me, Yusuf. I think it's a whole new ballgame because the single most important person in the mix is the president. And we don't know what the president is going to do on any of the major issues. And I think by design, he has put together a cabinet that is going to give him a variety of different options on all of these major questions. But let's just look at the geopolitics for a moment. I think President Erdogan has positioned Turkey into a fantastic place in terms of negotiating with Washington simultaneously about Ukraine and about Syria. The position of Ankara is stronger than ever before. And we know for a fact that President Trump personally is inclined to try to reach an accommodation with President Erdogan.
Mm-hmm. Dave, when we look at some of the past comments, for example, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, he's called for imposing sanctions on Türkiye. Peter Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, awaiting confirmation. He's talked about why Türkiye is a member of NATO. He's also said that Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan openly dreams of restoring the Ottoman Empire. Now, of course, Türkiye, a valuable NATO member, second largest army. Secretary Hegseth, if he's confirmed, he's going to be dealing with the Turks a lot. Marco Rubio is going to be dealing with Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan, who's also, Marco Rubio's also had comments about the Kurdish groups in northeast Syria. How do you think these relationships are going to play out when they sit down across from each other, according to what they've said in the past?
Well, the United States has conflicting aims and desires for how we see Turkey. When we look at Turkey in Europe, there's one group of people, and we have different bureaucracies that deal with it, by the way. So when we consider NATO issues, and Turkey is a part of NATO, the military discussion on that is held in Stuttgart. But when we look at Turkey and Syria, that's held at Central Command in Tampa, Florida. So there's actually different people working different aspects of Turkish policy, and you're going to see a little bit of contradictions. It's not as complimentary as I'd like to give to a Turkish audience, but I worked Turkish affairs in the Pentagon in 1985 as an intern when I had beautiful red hair, and back then the attitude was, what can we do for Turkey? Whenever there was a Turkish meeting, it was always like, how can we help them? What can we give them? What can we do? There was a lot of innovation. Since the rise of Erdogan, when people in the security infrastructure deal with Turkey, it's usually like, how do we manage this? It's viewed not as an opportunity to support Turkey, but we look at what Turkey has done and how that plays into our policy aims. So there's been a slight shift there. I think that the senior appointees will reflect that. And I think that if we look at, say, Turkey's role in building energy infrastructure to Europe, you'll get a different set of people and a different mood than you will if you talk about, say, Turkey's role in northwest Syria.
1985, a great time for a head of hair. I used to have a head of hair back then, too. Helin, when the Biden administration announced their cabinet, there was this tremendous concern in Turkey as well. And generally, when any incoming U.S. administration announces their cabinet, there's always this refrain, this kind of fear of what could come, probably because it's the unknown and you've gotten used to something for either 4 or 8 years and now it's changing. When we look back at Biden, nothing really major on the Turkey-U.S. side, at least not the disaster that anyone expected at the beginning. I mean, nothing positive, but nothing negative either that's too notable. We've already experienced 4 years of Trump. What are your thoughts?
Well, I guess we have to look at the latest decades in Turkish-American relations, and what we see is that this alliance is not immune of the problems or crises. So we've been witnessing many crises in mutual relations, but we also witnessed that the two countries cannot give up and they continue their relationship and they continue their efforts to solve their problems. So there will be problems, and for sure, with an administration like Trump's, there will be many, many crises in the coming 4 years. But I think both sides are dedicated to somehow solve this crisis. What we see with the new cabinet is that it's a kind of bargaining in between two sides. And the Trump administration, with these new sensational names, let's say, who are mainly against Turkey, who are mainly favoring Israel, who are mainly taking sides with Greece or Southern Cyprus. But despite all these problems in terms of Turkey's eyes, let's say, I believe that they are trying to somehow push for a hard bargaining against Turkey, but they also have to know and will understand that Turkey has some cards as well to play against the United States. The world is changing. The world is not the world of the 20th century anymore. There are other power circles that we are talking about, like Farid Zakaria, the rise of the West. So we have to keep Russia, India, China into consideration, as well as Brazil, South Africa. So it's a kind of multipolar world that we are talking about today, and the United States new administration will have to understand that the world is changing.
Mike, Trump episode 1, there was a lot of backlash from the middle bureaucracy, slow walking on certain issues, but it looks like episode 2, he's coming back much more powerful, has control of the Congress, both the House and the Senate, a big mandate, popular vote in the bag as well. And we've already seen first contact between the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan. In this statement that we saw, the Turkish side said that they talked about coordination on important regional issues. What do you think those regional issues are, and where can we see that cooperation?
I think the number one issue on which they need to coordinate in the near term is Ukraine. I think that the number two issue, and it's almost equal to Ukraine, is of course Syria. The Turks are now in a position, the dominant position in Syria. They can't rebuild Syria on their own. I was just in Damascus a couple of weeks ago. The level of destruction in the country really astounded me. I knew it intellectually, but it's one thing to know it, another thing to see it. And it brought home to me that that the Turks and the Qataris alone can't do this. They need the international community. I think that Ankara is well aware of this. They are in a position, Ankara is in a position to play the dominant role and to stabilize Syria like we haven't ever seen it stabilized in the last 12, 14 years. But they're also in need of the United States and its help. So I think there's the recipe here for a kind of grand bargain, or there's the opportunity here for a grand bargain. I hope that both sides will see that and work toward it. If they do, I think we could see astounding things in the Middle East, a kind of once in a generation opportunity to stabilize the whole region in everyone's interest.
Dave, Syria looks like it's going to be high on the agenda. There's a Turkish expectation that Trump will most likely complete the partial withdrawal that happened during his first administration. At least that seems to be the expectation in Ankara. Inside Trump's cabinet, you have Tulsi Gabbard, someone who has expressed warm views towards Assad back in the day. Marco Rubio, who's expressed warm views towards elements inside the SDF that Turkey views as undesirable or a national security threat, saying they're a direct extension of the PKK. How do you think that's going to play out? Will the cabinet be able to influence Trump, or is Trump going to want to complete the withdrawal, or some other type of grand bargain regarding Northeast Syria?
Well, let me start by pulling out one thing you said. I don't know that any person has the ability to influence Trump. He's sort of a black box analytically for us to look at. So I do a lot of work on Syria, and what I am telling people at this point is that we don't really have a Syria policy because we're trying to wait and see what the government in Damascus actually turns out to be. We know what they've said. They've said the right stuff, but we have to see what they're doing. And, you know, they're still sanctioned by the United States government. What I point out on Syria is that really our issues with Syria right now are playing out with Turkey. Turkish policy, U.S. Turkish policy is more important for Syria from the United States perspective right now than actual Syrian policy, because it's just not seen as mature enough to engage with. Our issues there, you mentioned the SDF, the Kurdish-led forces in northeast Syria. That is going to be a focal point of conflict between the United States and Turkey. As you noted, the Turks view them as a branch or an affiliate of the PKK, which both the Turkish and the United States government view as terrorist organizations. So there's an issue there. Trump does not want to be in Syria, but in the past, when he tried to withdraw, and recall that his first Secretary of Defense withdrew in protest when he basically pulled support from the SDF in parts of Syria that Turkey wanted to occupy. I believe it was prevailed upon him that a total withdrawal would lead to a disaster and to the reestablishment of Daesh. And I think that dynamic on the ground hasn't changed. So I think there's some hard negotiations ahead.
Helin, do you think the duos of Rubio and Fidan, or Waltz and Kılıç, Gabbard and Cullen, Hegseth and Güler, do you think they could sit down and hammer out a deal where both the Americans are pleased and the Turks are pleased about the situation in northeast Syria?
Well, that's the best scenario, and I think that's not impossible. So it's highly possible that both sides will come together and somehow reach a kind of compromise regarding their priorities. And the United States, especially American administration, for a long time, I guess they understood that the terror problem, Turkey's fight against terrorism, especially PKK terrorism, is it's one of the biggest priorities, and this is about the survival of the country. For that reason, I guess the Turkish side will not give up, will not take any step backwards in order to tell that Turkey's desire is somehow, in which way I don't know, but to eliminate PKK in northern Syria for sure. In the last couple of weeks, we are seeing that YPG forces are somehow in a kind of negotiation with Barzani administration. Maybe we'll see a kind of rapprochement between KDP and also YPG in Syria. So there might be a kind of agreeing point between Turkey and the United States, and I guess that might pass through somehow bringing together the KDP and YPG by getting rid of the PKK sources.
Mm-hmm. Mike, I want to shift gears to Israel. Now, on paper, when you look at this cabinet, it's probably one of the most pro-Israel cabinets we've ever seen. Trump has even proclaimed himself in the past as Israel's best friend. But at the same time, his influence in this recently signed ceasefire agreement is undeniable. And this agreement seems to have left much in the Netanyahu administration very, very unhappy. So how are we going to see this cabinet play out in relations between the U.S. and Israel, and also what Israel is doing in the expanded region?
You know, it's very similar to the predictions or the discussion that we're having about how the cabinet is going to relate to Turkey, because you can see different strains of thinking that are well represented in the Trump administration. One strain of thinking, represented by Mike Huckabee, says that Israel is the best ally of the United States. And that we should basically give a green light to any Israeli plan with respect to the Palestinians. Another strain of thinking, represented by, let's say, Tucker Carlson, he says that the Israelis are pulling us into conflicts that are not in our interest. Once again, it's going to be up to the president to decide which way he wants to go. He campaigned on a slogan of peace through strength. The strength element of his message leads people to believe that he's going to support Israel strongly in its continuing war with Iran. The peace, those who put emphasis on the peace element of his message point, as you just did, to the pressure that he put on the Israelis to get a ceasefire, and they suggest that what we're going to see is a negotiation between the United States and Iran rather than military pressure. Nobody can say how Donald Trump is going to square this circle and which side he's going to come down on here. For those of us who are interested in improving the U.S.-Turkish relationship, I think the most important thing that we can do is emphasize the role that Syria can play as a buffer between the Turks and the Israelis. And if we get the tectonic plates of U.S.-Israel on Syria and U.S.-Turkey on Syria in the right place, I think we can, as I said before, stabilize the whole region.
David, under Biden, there was a lot of institutionalization of diplomacy, with the State Department taking the lead in not only Turkey relations, but also with other countries as well. And what Middle Eastern leaders were used to under Trump changed under Biden. Now we're probably going to see that come back, as Donald Trump likes to be very, very hands-on, get on that phone with the leader, make that deal, and kind of grab the spotlight. Do you think that his style is more effective, especially vis-a-vis the region in the Middle East, or an institutionalization of the relationship is better?
Well, I'm a career bureaucrat, so I always go for, or I was rather, so I always like to see things institutionalized. And one of the extraordinary things about Trump is that he has appointed a large number of special envoys, to include one thing that I've never seen before with an ally in peacetime. He appointed a special envoy for Great Britain. And it's like, well, we have an ambassador to Great Britain. So the idea of the president personalizing policy, it has strengths and weaknesses. I think that if you're in a situation that basically the institution has just shown an inability to move forward, that there just isn't the institutional capacity or firepower to move forward. I'm talking about long, intractable things like, say, North Korea or Israel, Jordan, although they're friendly, but Middle East is one of those areas where perhaps a special envoy could make a difference. You think about Amos Hochstein, the special envoy for energy, negotiating a demarcation of natural gas offshore between Hezbollah and Israel, the first Hezbollah-Israel agreement. That really is remarkable because that was conducted at the height of Hezbollah's power when it was an active military proxy of Iran. But in general, I am suspicious of this, and I think that the appointment of special envoys and the personalization of policy reflects a distaste for the Washington establishment, which many Trump supporters have come to characterize as a fifth estate and as an inherently Democrat constituency that they seek to marginalize. So I think the bureaucracy has to prove it can do something, and then Trump will be held, he won't be running again, but his successors will be held responsible for getting results.
Helin, when we look at the cabinet, they're quite hawkish on Iran. Trump himself hawkish on Iran. Is there anyone there that's going to be able to rein in maximum pressure? Or is it just going to be fifth gear, full speed ahead towards Iran?
Well, I guess that's all the point about the Middle East, because in my point of view, why Trump administration is trying to push Israeli-Palestinian side to a ceasefire, an urgent ceasefire, is mainly about Iran. They already pushed Iran quite a lot from the region, but there will be more steps, and especially the next steps will be about the nuclear deal. This will be the maximum pressure campaign again against Iran, and we are not sure about what the next step of Iran will be. Maybe Iran will also look for a compromise with the United States of America. So for sure, there's no clarity regarding the region, but we know that the pressure on Iran will increase. There is a high and strong rhetoric from the Trump administration that he wants to be the biggest peacemaker of the American history. Maybe he's looking for a Nobel Peace Prize, but in the end, if you apply the pressure and this pressure causes a kind of big war, a regional war, maybe a global war, finally, you cannot be the biggest peacemaker of the region, of the time, let's say, of the century. I guess this should be pursued, this policy should be pursued quite carefully, because in the end, there might be a war that they don't want to have. So for sure, they will apply pressure, but we don't know the main conclusion, main result, the outcome of this pressure policy. After Iran, the next step will be China. And many people are claiming that even Iran is just a stone on the path towards China. So there will be two main targets of this hawkish administration, one Iran and the next one China.
Mm-hmm. Mike, even if it's only a social media post, there seems to be a first contact or an outreach from US President Donald Trump towards Russian President Vladimir Putin, kind of a carrot and stick, let's make peace in Ukraine or you're going to get sanctioned, think about your economy type of social media post. During the campaign, he said, I'll bring peace in Ukraine one day. Now, that's obviously campaign talk. It's a lot more complicated than that. But how do you view his cabinet's approach? Because up till now, the overwhelming majority of the Congress was full-on support for Ukraine. There are some members of his cabinet that have expressed in the past more diplomacy, but generally the cabinet seems to be full-on military support for Ukraine.
I think once again the personality of the president is going to be what really determines things here. But you're right, of course, that the National Security Advisor Waltz and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, historically they're coming from a different position than Trump has with regard to Ukraine. Historically, they are more, I would say, mainstream Republican foreign policy proponents, who would see the Putin's war in Ukraine as a threat to the United States. And so, but I think that both of them have shifted, and we can see that there is the outlines, what the Americans would consider the outlines of a decent deal. The interesting thing from our point of view of this discussion here today is that I think that President Erdogan has positioned himself to be the primary interlocutor of the United States in the NATO alliance about a potential ceasefire in Ukraine, and that can have enormous implications for how Trump understands cooperation with Ankara on Syria and other issues.
David, Helen, Mike, thanks for a great conversation. Unfortunately, we're out of time.
Thank you.
And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Yusuf Ertem. If you got any comments, please share them with us on X at Straight Talk TRT. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find more exclusive content. Until next time, take care and goodbye.